Yeah, that's political report. I follow this girl on TikTok, and she's a social market and she makes like videos of art. And basically, she saw a niche coming and she thought,
do an internship, unpaid doing this. Next semester. Couple of hours a no pressure, you will be unpaid, but you will be able to put it on the CV after Research Institute, which I run. So basically this is the glory of actually telling what they want to do.
if you've got like information, like put down email.
I will probably forget over the next while, but I will keep it in mind. Right? It won't be until next semester. Okay, so Frankfurt School had a very definitive position on mass-produced culture. In order to have an idea like that, you need to be able to say why it's bad. Okay? Now, Frankfurt School had a lot of answers to this, but in order to do why it's bad, you need to point to examples of why things, or how they could be different. So, classically, this group would argue that there was two types of culture, high culture and low culture. High culture is exhibited by classical forms, classical music, classical art, classical sculpture, etc. The idea being that these are expressions of individualistic genius in some way. If you look at, take the Mona Lisa for example, this is a piece of art created by one person in a particular context, can't be reproduced. I mean, you can copy it, but the copy is not as valuable in any way, shape or form. The original holds value because it embeds a certain set of ideas, a certain perspective on the world, a particular way of thinking about the world itself. And therefore, this work of art is not subject to like how many people go and see it. It is intrinsically valuable in its own right. So, what the Frankfurt School did was contrast things that they said were art, which is valuable for its own sake, and low culture, which is valuable only in the context of how much money it produces. This is the critical difference between different types of media, if you like. There is some media which is made in order to be valuable in itself, to express a certain set of ideas or artistic sensibility, and then there is other media which is pretty pointless and is only there to make money. So Bride Wars is just there to make money. There's no pretense to high art in Bride Wars. It follows a particular formula which everyone knows is going to work in order to make as much money as possible. And if it doesn't make that money, it's seen as a failure. It's not seen as a failure in terms of its artistic merit, because it doesn't have any. And it doesn't even pretend to have any. These things are not made in order for people to sit back and think, wow, this is really beautiful. It doesn't work that way. Particular types of media are made purely to make money. And they call that low culture. Now, high culture is works of media, any given work of media, which is there to express a particular set of ideas or a particular cultural standard which sits above market value. Now, it could be that something like the Mona Lisa, for example, if the Louvre in Paris ever wanted to sell the Mona Lisa, God knows how much it would cost. Hundreds of millions of dollars, probably, if somebody was willing to buy it. So it has a market value, but weirdly, it's kind of priceless in that sense. They're never going to sell it anyway. You know, it's above and beyond any kind of market worth, especially for that organisation. So, in this, we have differentiation of different kinds of things made in the cultural industry, in the times of cultural industry. For the Frankfurt School, the culture industry was all about making low culture. They did not produce works of art. We can contrast it with high culture, where works of art are created for their own sake, rather than the artistic, rather than the market value that they would raise. Later on in this lecture, I'm going to express why I think this is a very, very problematic thing. Because of that, they've expressed a huge amount of attention on what they call folk art forms. Folk art being materials produced by individuals not to be sold. It's interesting that in the 50s and 60s you start to see the emergence of folk music, which, when it first became available, was supposed to be a reaction against popular music. Folk music was supposed to be something which was more worthwhile, more worthy, not catering to popular tastes, until it became popular. And then it became reproduced and mass-produced, and it became just another form of the culture industry. So they were interested in this notion of folk art as opposed to mass-produced media, cinema and music in particular. The idea that you would make a particular form of music which you knew was going to be popular because other things had been popular as well, and then you just make it over and over again. And we see this in terms of generic forms of music over the years. In the 1960s, you see the emergence of Beatles, for example. They emerged, 62, 63 from Liverpool, and become extremely popular. What follows in their wake? Thousands of Beatles clones. Loads of bands who want to sound like the Beatles. An entire sound, the British invasion sound, as the Americans knew it, emerges in the wake of the Beatles. Everyone trying to sound exactly the same as the Beatles. Why? The Beatles sold a shit ton of records. You know? Now, Beatles is an interesting case because I would argue that there's probably some artistic merit in some of the things that the Beatles did as well, especially towards the end of their career. They weren't really aiming to be mass marketable anymore. In fact, they had turned away from that, and people still bought their records and shit tons afterwards. But I'll come on to what that means later on. So, you see in popular culture, a trend emerges and everyone dives on top of it and starts repeating that trend. We see this in digital culture also. Perfect example of it being TikTok behaviour, where you see a trend emerge and then everyone is doing that trend instantly afterwards. So this is not something which has disappeared from culture. So the contrast between folk art and mass-produced media narrows into a contrast that they make between use value and exchange value. So we have now a society, according to the Frankfurt School, where things are mass-produced in accordance with how cultural taste has been set. Drawing on a Marxist analysis, because this is directly out of Marx's Das Kapital, they look at what the difference between use value is and exchange value. And I think my example here is quite beautiful. What is the difference between an Yves Saint Laurent bag and a Lidl bag? Anyone tell me? Functionally, what can you do with one that you can't do with the other?
You zip one, you can't zip the
Mm-hmm.
other.
You can use the zip on one of them. Well, okay, smart ass. But alright, there's a zip on one. Alright, I'll take the little bag out of the equation here and replace it with like a £5 bag with a zip or in Lidl. What, in terms of functionality, can one do that the other can't? Carry more?
Give you a status.
Just buy a bigger one.
It can give you a status.
Gives you a status. Okay. So, It's kind of around the discussion we were having about sign clothes. The difference between these two things is one of status. There is nothing I couldn't carry in this that I couldn't carry in that. Let's say that the weather was not inclement, so therefore I didn't need a zip. Then I could quite happily carry all my stuff in a little bag costing 10 pence to the YSL bag costing in magnitudes of hundreds of pounds, assuming it's real. The difference between real and fake is interesting in this context as well. There is a use value and an exchange value embedded in cultural goods. And as a society, we value the exchange value more. So for the Frankfurt School, the purpose of the culture industry is to eradicate our knowledge of use value, which is, you know, your bag, doesn't matter if it's from Lidl or it's from Yves Saint Laurent, it's just a bag. A great example of this is your car. What does a car do? Thank you. And on the weekend, it gets you to see you. You know? Car is a mode of transportation. I have friends who really want to talk to me about how amazing their Mercedes is. I'm like, shut the fuck up, you idiot. You've spent £25,000 on a car. I should take you outside and kick every one of your teeth out of your head because you are an imbecile. Car is a tool. It does a job. His Mercedes, well, guess what? I can make the same journey in my shitty little Kia. It'll cost me less money in terms of insurance, in terms of petrol, and in terms of how much it actually cost me to buy the damn piece of shit in the first place. I don't care about cars. I think it's the most ridiculous thing to care about, and I think there's a whole cultural aspect of people caring about cars which just blows my mind. So why do you care? Why is it important to you? Anyone who owns an Audi is automatically a wanker of the highest order. Okay? Anyone who buys one of those cars, you know, anyone who even expresses a desire to own an Audi, wanker. Because they're part of a culture of wankers, basically, and this is important. Wanker in this is not a term to refer to men. Women can be wankers too. Okay? Now, for the Frankfurt School, one of the purposes of the culture industry is to eradicate the notion of use value and instead replace it with exchange value. Because this affirms the economic base of society in terms of its capitalist foundations. That we need to buy things for more than they're actually worth, or for more than the alternatives that are available to us. And we see it in action in this room. Ash, I promise I am not going to drop this, but this is actually a really nice laptop. So we're going to pretend that Ash's laptop is actually a cheap piece of crap. It isn't. This is really expensive. I'm not going to drop it. So, you have a Windows laptop. Yes. Okay. So, here we go. Also not going to drop it. Because I've dropped one of these in the past and it costs a lot to replace the screen. What is the difference? We have an Apple laptop. What's the difference between those two things?
One has more status.
One has more status. In what way?
Like the Apple laptop is like Apple is a much bigger brand. Like in terms of like reputation.
What does it say about the person who has Apple? Does it say money? I don't think it just says that. I think Apple as a brand says, to an extent it says money. Because if one owns a different laptop brand, then perhaps when you compare the exchange value of those two items, and you come to the conclusion, okay, the exchange value of the Apple is more, therefore this person has a higher economic status, perhaps. Does it say anything else?
Status quo. As in the status quo, like following what's normally in culture, and the fact that Apple is more popular just makes people want to buy it. They don't really.
That's interesting. Yeah, it reaffirms a particular status quo, as in that status itself that I just explained. I think Apple says professional, as opposed, I don't mean like amateur, but this is somebody who's more serious about what they're using their machine for. They've invested a lot in it. I mean, the idea is that Apple is, has more utility. It's a better machine, it does things better. All of that is a myth. And I do own an Apple machine, by the way, but I don't use it because it simply doesn't do the things that I need it to do. Interestingly, I almost certainly guarantee this person isn't in the room. Okay, somebody got a 0 for assignment 2. I kind of lied about the market. Somebody got a 0. Anyone want to guess why?
Cover sheets.
Actually, no, the cover sheets I overlooked this time, but that's really bad. They didn't, well, a few people didn't hand it. To be fair, but,
It's the format that they handed it.
yeah, somebody put it in pages. And I was like, sorry, I can't mark it. I literally can't open it. And it comes up blank. So again, I will reiterate, if you're an Apple user, please download Office, all right? I'm sure most of you have already done that. Now, I'm labouring over the point again, but the exchange value here is that a machine that does actually less, Apple machines do less than your laptop, but you've actually got a really snazzy laptop. But the exchange value is more. This also goes for your phones. iPhone, yeah, really slick, really nice, looks great. Does a lot less than an Android can. Depending on the Android phone you have, you might need to spend a bit of money, but I gave up on iPhones 5 years ago because like when they tipped £1,000, it was like, nah, I'm out. And now I've got a 600 quid phone that does more than any Apple phone could do. Sarah.
My name's not Sarah.
What is it?
Emma.
Emma. Why did I call you Sarah?
Don't know.
It is Sarah now. Sarah.
Where does like fast fashion come into it? Because sometimes you're paying like cheaper, you're paying for a cheap product that may not be as good quality.
Okay. It's a very, very good question. One that Adorno and Horkheimer would have struggled to answer. But you can think about fast fashion in a very, very simple acceleration of this process. So, you have use value and exchange value. These things still apply. If you like, you can think of fast fashion as an equalization of these two things. So the exchange value, i.e. the price, comes down, and you can still use it to do the same thing. But what happens with fast fashion? What is the lifespan of something bought in that model? Very short. So you accelerate the process by which you replace. So the use value is actually diminished in fast fashion, and it's deliberately done so. Deliberately in order to bring the price down. Firstly, use lower quality materials, you use lower quality manufacturing processes in order to keep the price as low as possible. That means that you have to replace goods at a much more accelerated rate. Therefore, what you see is just a change in this model a little. The exchange value is brought down, but the use value is also concurrently brought down as well. So it creates a different cycle, if you like, where you have to replace your goods. The problem more with fast fashion is because the exchange value is brought so low, it becomes disposable. This is one of the things that classical economic theory like this does struggle to understand. When we buy things through a fast fashion model, we dispose of them incredibly quickly. It's not that they just run out, that they break or anything like that. There's no incentive to keep. You just, wear them once and think, right, chuck that in the bin. Well, all that chucking in the bin has to go somewhere. And there we have, does it go into landfill? Does it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole bunch of economic principles underpinning it which have environmental consequences as well, including the fact that these goods are usually manufactured in areas of the world which are very far away from where we are, so there's actually a cost environmentally in terms of getting them here in the first place. But it's a really good question, Sarah. I don't know, I was thought, do you know what? The problem with this is, I only get one seminar group this year. I used to take more, and now I don't know anyone's names. So can I ask actually something? I know it's really bad in week 7, but if you put your hand up, I know this sounds so bad. I know some of your names, some, but if I don't, can you please just say what your name is, and then I will learn names a lot quicker. But I won't see you guys until semester 2 of next year anyway, after this module, so I'll forget them all then, so it's no big deal. The cycle of use value and exchange value fails to recognise that there is value outside the capitalist system. Now, I've used a film to illustrate this, which I feel kind of bad in doing, because I really like the film, and I really hate the company that made the film. So this is a Pixar movie. Pixar's owned by Disney. I hate Disney more than anything. Disney are the worst. But what WALL-E as a film does, and I think it's amazing, I think it's an absolutely fantastic film, I really do. What WALL-E as a film does is something very odd for a Disney film. It shows that goods can have a value outside the capitalist system. So when WALL-E finds the ring, he doesn't value it in terms of its exchange value as we would conceptualize it in normal society. If you buy an engagement ring for somebody, it has a price on it, which sort of puts a market value on how you feel about that person, right? It's a deeply cynical process. It's like, you know, I love this person, but I'm going to exhibit it in a way that is ostentatious to other people. You know, why does it matter if you love somebody that you buy them a 50 quid engagement ring? Well, test that hypothesis out, gentlemen. All right? It ain't going to end well for you, I can assure you. Because in the wider cultural context of exchange in this act, it has to be expensive in order for it to say something about the nature of your relationship. When you put it in those terms, it's insane, right? WALL-E understands the ring in a completely different context. He isn't giving it to someone else, although it's really sweet in the end when it does. But it's the exchange value here has been taken out in its entirety. He sees something completely valuable to it. There is value for things outside of the capitalist system, but the capitalist system makes it virtually impossible for it to see that value, because capitalist society is everywhere. WALL-E doesn't exist in the capitalist society. He lives on a burnt out husk of the planet Earth, which is filled with trash. Society is completely collapsed. Therefore, capitalism as a set of values has collapsed, and he can see the inherent value of particular objects in this trash-filled world. This is an interesting thing to have come out of Disney. It really is. But back in the days when Pixar did really weird ideological things, which they stopped doing shortly after this. They stopped doing after Up, which has a really remarkable ideological message embedded in it as well. For Adorno, we live in a society of mass reproduction. All of our things, if we ignore that things have a value outside the capitalist system, instead what we have is a great series of things which are just reproduced. Now, this is one of my favourite images of all time. This is from a long time ago, and I keep on reusing this image because it pleases me so. Now, does anyone in this room like toast? Yeah, most people like toast, right? You know, you apply heat to bread, and it's nice. And then you put some butter on it, and this is good shit, alright? Yeah. Does anyone here like crumpets? That's like the upper level of toast. That is for when, you know, I'm feeling like it's going to be a good day. Let's go get some crumpets on. Now. Who fucking pays £165 for a toast? Holy shit! £152 that one up there.
I would.
Really? There is no toast. I mean, that better be the best fucking toast ever. That's all I'm saying. If you're paying that amount of money. £165 for something. Let me tell you, if you had a match and some bread, you can make toast. It's the same fucking, you might burn your fingers because the match burns down, but if you have a cigarette lighter, it might taste a bit weird. But my principle applies here, right? £165. slightly cut off, but we can see this lovely looking toaster at the bottom here. That retails for £12. Which one am I buying? The £12 one. Do you know why? Because I just want toast. I don't know. Is the £165 one nice looking? Not really. I mean, it might fit in with some loser who spent like 20,000 quid on their kitchen to make it look like X. Emma?
I've just looked it up and the toaster that my nan has costs £190.
£109. Can we see this toaster, please? I need a kick in the head at this point.
It's one where the toast goes down by itself.
The toast goes down, but holy shit! Have we reached that? See, I don't go to the drive-in window because I think people who go to the drive-in window are lazy fucks who can't be bothered to get out of the car and actually speak to a human being. I don't use the screens in McDonald's because I think that's lazy. To not even push the thing down on the side of the toaster, that is a new level of, I don't know what.
The toaster
I respect you now.
15 quid, so.
It's different. It's exciting. It's exciting to see people living out their fantasies of having hands-free toast. If that is a fantasy of yours, obviously it's out there. Somebody's going to come around and tell me in a minute that like you can have a toaster controlled by an app on your phone, and then I am going to walk into the woods in Henry Island and kill myself. Because why is toast needed to have an app? Now, in a capitalist society, you have infinite reproductions of potential. There's always a finite thing, the notion of what you can actually produce. But there are an infinite number of possibilities of what you can do as a basic design of a toaster. And we see that expressed, if you just look up toaster on Amazon and switch to grid view, you will see lots of different kinds of toasters for lots of different prices. In terms of use value, they're all the same. And somebody could say, well, one has only room for 2 slices and one has room for 4, so is the use value increased? Shut the fuck up. It is doing exactly the same job. Okay? If you have 4 pieces of toast in the morning, calm down on the toast, right? Because you know, you're going to end up like, you know, having a gluten intolerance at that point. So, you know, chill out. So, we reproduce over and over and over again. The culture industry is responsible for this reproduction. That leads to 2 absolutely critical aspects of culture, which the Frankfurt School identified, and Adorno and Horkheimer in particular. Standardization and pseudo-individualization. And these are really the 2 key ideas that I want you to take away from today. Standardization means that a form is created which can be repeated over and over again. So the basic design of every toaster is the same. You plug it into an electricity supply, you turn it on, elements within the toaster itself warm up, and that applies heat to bread in order to transform bread into toast. There is a deep philosophical question here about at what stage does the bread become the toast? There must be a direct point. I would appreciate essays on this. They are outside of the scope of what we can do in this, but I will mark it for extra credit, if you like. Once standardization has been achieved, then you have pseudo-individualization. Now, the Frankfurt School were not talking about toasters, although I would have loved to have read it, because that would have been bonkers. Frankfurt School were talking about media and culture. So, if we apply these ideas to media and culture, what are they saying? Standardization. A form is created. The rom-com, for example. And then, after that, you just have pseudo-individualization. There is no change in what is being produced. You change elements around the central form, if you like, to trick the audience into coming again. Different actresses, different actors, different soundtrack, different title, different setting. But the basic core is identical because it is standardized. In the music industry, different act, different lead singer, different guitar player, different drummer, different bass player, different vision, different look. all the same shit at the end of the day. This is intensified in the age of EDM, where literally it's very often the same music just remixed by somebody different. So, standardization begets pseudo-individualization. The idea that text and media are individual, that they are significant in their own right, but that is pseudo. It is an illusion. It is just the same stuff being produced over and over again. And this is where I go to town on superhero movies. I've never seen a better genre of this. Standardization. White American becomes superhero in some randomly, kind of technologically or supernaturally imposed way. White American observes threat to Earth. White American saves Earth. Standardization. Pseudo-individualization. Let's change the white American. Let's change the white American to a woman. Let's change the white American to an African American. Ooh, now we're cooking. It's the same fucking film, people, over and over again. Pseudo-individualization is all that is happening here. There is nothing new. Star Wars, the same. Star Wars is the worst example of this, in fact. Star Wars is Nazi, right? If you think about the first Star Wars from 1977, right? Blonde-haired, blue-eyed Luke Skywalker, Nazi poster boy, right? Jumps in his fucking spaceship and blows up Vader's hood. The blackest dude in the galaxy gets his house blown up by Nazi poster boy Luke Skywalker. This, my friends, is disturbing shit. I have been waiting years to get that off my chest. Luke Skywalker is a Nazi and Vader is the blackest dude of all time. Although it's the most insulting part of that whole trilogy is the last one, when they reveal that Vader is actually a crusty white dude. Trying to say that all black people will actually be white. That is even more insulting. Nazi, racist films hate them. And they're the same as every other fucking film of that kind as well, because they are standardised and pseudo-individualised.
600 quid for the toaster wrap.
600 notes for an... Whoa.
Well, 630 for a toaster with an app. Yeah, you can set it to like bagel setting, crumpet setting. Like Amazon.
I would love to know what the difference between those things is. 630. Anyone who buys that, I'm going to go around their house and basically just steal everything they have, because clearly they have no concept of value at that point, so I'm just going to take all their money. We have processes of standardization and pseudo-individualization everywhere. Cereal industry is a classic, right? There is no difference between Kellogg's cornflakes and the supermarket cornflakes. It's the same thing. But you buy the Kellogg's ones because they taste nicer. They're made from the same fucking factory. They just put it in a different bag. The difference in price is like fivefold what people will buy. But don't mess with my Coke Pops, because they are magical. I actually bought Frosties this week for the first time in a long time, and do you know, I'm such an infant. When I go home this evening, I'm going to a gig tonight, but I'm going to have a bowl of Frosties before going to the gig, because I am 8. So, these processes exist everywhere. It's the same shit in all of this, and these things will give you cancer. So, don't eat too much of this. But, it is exactly the same stuff. These processes proliferate across entire societies. For the Frankfurt School, what this boils down to, standardization and pseudo-individualization across capitalist society as a whole, is that satisfaction and pleasure is reduced to saying yes to consuming all this stuff. That our satisfaction and pleasure in society is boiled down to going to see the band that sounds like every other band. Getting really excited, a couple of weeks ago, I'd gone to watch a film. I don't very often go to the cinema because of this, but I went to watch John Carpenter's The Thing in View in town. from 1982. It's a 40-year anniversary release. And as I was walking along to view, I was walking past the arena, and they were like, Kaiser Chiefs are playing at the arena. I was like, anyone who goes to that needs to be euthanized, you know, or at least sterilized so they cannot reproduce. Because the Kaiser Chiefs are the worst, the absolute lowest form of culture that there is. And there will be thousands of people in a cultural backwater like Swansea who will be like, yes, Kaiser Chiefs in Swansea, yes, and that's the word, yes. They're saying yes to this banality and mediocrity. And there is nothing more mediocre than those bunch of gibbering Yorkshire scumbags who couldn't hold a tune if you beat them with a guitar. So, to be pleased though, you need to say yes to these things. And you know, Arctic Monkeys, right, in the summer in the stadium. Who's going? Oh yeah, you all said yes. They haven't had a good album in fucking 20 years. So, you know, but say yes. Say yes to the Arctic Monkeys. Listen to them transform their sound from guitar-based to Mogadon-based, you know, and you know, sending people to sleep. Basically, their argument, kind of, I always sum it up as Rihanna versus Beethoven. Okay? For the Frankfurt School, we should consider Beethoven to be superior to Rihanna. Now, here's where it all flips. I think Rihanna's better than Beethoven. I don't like classical music. I think it's rubbish. I really don't. I like death metal. No, this is not my style. Does Rihanna make good music? That is a matter of taste and opinion. It genuinely is. Do I know that she makes really effective music that a lot of people listen to? Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that. Is she auto-tuned to within an inch of her life? Unquestionably. I very much doubt she sings like you actually hear. And I know when she plays live, she's also auto-tuned. I don't think anyone's ever heard her sing, which is interesting. But does that mean that there is something intrinsically unworthwhile about Rihanna's music? No. The Frankfurt School oppose on us is a set of values which we don't have to agree with. I think it's unfair to suggest that the entirety of mass-produced culture is somehow deficient. There have been great works of art that have come out of Hollywood. There have been great works of art that have come out of the music industry. I alluded to the Beatles earlier. Now the Beatles, and again, actually I'm not a big fan of the Beatles, I don't really listen to them at all, but I can recognise that they made some really great works of art in a mass production, mass culture setting. I'm a big fan of Black Sabbath, for example. They made, okay, it might not be art to everyone, but I think in the context of what they were doing, this is really, really exciting stuff. Just as Frankfurt School were accused mass culture of making false needs, I think they make a false dichotomy. That there's some things which are intrinsically more worthwhile just because of the way they're made. That doesn't sound congruous to me. And so, for example, those of you who are going to watch the Arctic Monkeys, you might well think that the Arctic Monkeys albums and singles are intrinsically valuable and worthwhile and not fine. I've got no problem with that. I'm not a fan myself, but I have no problem with people thinking. You know, the Frankfurt School do. Frankfurt School impose a normative set of values on culture itself. Interestingly, there's something good and bad in that. They do draw attention to what mass culture is and what a lot of mass culture is, which is trash. But they ignore that within the processes of mass culture, there could well be very important works of art produced within those cultures themselves as well. This is the major weakness of Frankfurt School.
I was just wondering, like, is it that, oh yeah, I've forgotten. Say there was a piece of art now that they would consider high art, and then that got popularised and standardised and mass produced, would they then criticise
Yes.
origin of that? Yeah.
Yes, they would. They would say that it loses that artistic value once it becomes popularised in that way. So the reason why they focused on these kind of old folk arts is, like, I'll use the Mona Lisa as an example again. If the Mona Lisa was made using an Apple Mac, it wouldn't be valuable because it's instantly reproducible and copyable. It's the format, if you like, that it was made in, which means that a copy is impossible, that makes it intrinsically valuable beyond market worth. If something, I mean, I think in digital society they would argue that everything is worthless, which is even more problematic as far as I'm concerned, because it does ignore that it is a huge amount of creativity expressed in ways which can be reproduced instantly. So this dichotomy that they've installed between high art being something which is valuable and, if you like, can't be mass produced, and low culture being stuff which can be mass produced, it's a complete false dichotomy. There's a lot of things which can be mass produced which are actually really, really artistically valuable. So this is where I think there's a major hole in what they're talking about. That said, I still think what they're talking about is really interesting. If you look at, you know, standardization and pseudo-individualization, you know, is there any difference between a K-pop band and a boy band of the 2000s? Actually, no. K-pop have just copied that formula. Now, the sound might be different, but that's a pseudo-individualization, the sound. What are they of? That the function, and the function of, like, boy bands in particular, is not music. Right? They don't set out to make great art. They set out to sell records, concerts, merchandise, what we call paratexts, right? The texts which come out around that band. So, for the Frankfurt School, there would be absolutely no difference between these things over time. For them, K-pop bands are no different to, you know, the first wave of boy bands that came in the 60s. They all serve the same purpose. You might ask, why is the relevance of all this today? Why have I spent 2 hours going through all this shit? Well, one, you need to fucking know it. Two, there is relevance today. So we are not in the era that, you know, the mass media broadcast era that the Frankfurt School were operating in and were writing about. It is applicable to digital media, though. There is no question there. And in particular, we can look at the function of digital media. So, as I've argued previously, before the study week, digital media is all about control. Digital media companies want to control their audiences just like the media producers of Adorno and Horkheimer's age. It's just that their methods now are different, but their actual desire is still for control. So you still produce in order to engender a sense of control, in order to make people into happy little consumers, in order to buy things. And remembering the previous lecture, in order to capture people's attention, in order to transform attention into data to be sold to other companies. It is still just a business. It is still about creating false needs. There's still standardization and pseudo-individualization. You look at any set. I've actually got a third year who's doing this right now for a dissertation. She's looking at a sort of meta-analysis of key influencers on Instagram. And basically what she's doing is she's going through 100 different influencers, looking at 20 different posts that they've made over a set period of time, and looking, what is it that they posted? I don't know if anyone's ever done this before, to actually ask, what do these people do? Unsurprisingly, they're all doing the same thing. It visually, if she was doing a textual analysis, and we'll come on to textual analysis in a couple of weeks' time, if she was doing a textual analysis, it would come up with a slightly different set of results, because obviously they're creating slightly different aesthetics for their individual brand. But this is a pseudo-individualization. What's actually there is a standardized form of address for influencers on the platform. They're all doing the same thing in order to achieve the same aims, which is, ostensibly, if you want to be an influencer, you need to post in a way that will monetize your content, which means you're selling other people's shit. And that's really all of what these people are doing. No real differences in content. You know, If you look at meme culture, yeah, sure, memes can say different things, but at the root, they're the same thing, and they're used for the same purpose. So, although the platforms have changed, the modes of exchange have changed, everything is still just a business about creating false needs, and standardization and pseudo-individualization are still major factors. Now, Donald and Horkheimer argued that the mass media were responsible for transmission of ideologies to a ruling class. Those in power are able to diffuse ideologies, and we know this from Marxist theory already, but the concept that I haven't introduced fully yet is hegemony. This comes from Antonio Gramsci, and how hegemony is achieved is important. Once a dominant set of ideas has been legitimized to this extent that it is common sense, like, for example, that capitalism is the only way that you can do things, that is what we call hegemonic. That has become a hegemonic idea in society. It cannot be challenged. It is just common sense that that's the way. It's a bit like smoking, right? Smoking's bad, isn't it? That's a hegemonic idea. 50 years ago, that wasn't what people said about smoking. I smoke, okay? And it has pictures on the packet of what's going to happen to me. Well, let me tell you now, if I don't consume these, worse is going to happen to other people around me, okay? Very quickly. This is a long-term thing. If I don't get these inside me, that's going to happen instantly. We don't put the dangers of that on the cigarette packet. But it's become a hegemonic idea that cigarette smoking is bad. It is bad. If you smoke, please give up. It's really, really bad for you, okay? How this is done, how hegemony is created is really important. And this really brings an end to what I call the first section of the theory course, where how do ideas become legitimized? According to Stuart Hall, who is an extremely important media theorist, when statements about a topic are made within a particular discourse, the discourse makes it possible to construct the topic in a certain way. It also limits the other ways in which the topic can be constructed. It's a little bit confusing, but it's actually a really simple idea here. What Hall is arguing is that the media constructs the way that we can talk about things in society. And we have this going on at the moment, fortunately, although not really fortunately in terms of society. Fortunately, we have this going on at the moment with immigration in the UK. I spent last week in Poland. Poland has had 3 million migrants in the last 9 months. Since the start of Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine, 3 million people have entered Poland to make it their temporary home. Are the Polish people and the Polish media up in arms about this? No, not in any way, shape or form. They see it as an intrinsically valuable thing to do as a society. They see helping their neighbours who are in desperate straits as being a valuable thing that they should do as a society. And so they are quite happily, even in terms of rampant inflation and cost of living crisis, nobody is saying kick these Ukrainians out. We, as a country, are going mental about 10,000 people coming over here, apparently illegally. You can't actually be an illegal asylum seeker because asylum seeking is legal in any country in the world. So the idea of there being an illegal asylum seeker is a complete falsehood in the first place. But we as a country are now going, there's an invasion going on. Go and ask a Ukrainian what an invasion actually looks like. You might have a different answer. For Hall, what is going on here is that the media and politicians are creating a discourse which only allows these things to be spoken about in a particular way. The view I have just expressed is not on television, is not in the newspapers. Nobody is saying those things because there is a particular way of talking about this which is being constructed right in front of us. And if you go to boomer pubs in Swansea, go to the pub, I wouldn't advise going to the Potter's Wheel to anyone, right? But go there and listen to how people are talking about this. It is It's not just that like there's an invasion on the southeast coast, it's that they're actually responsible for all the problems in our society at the moment. You know, mass inflation. Yeah, we got too many immigrants, that's the problem. It's like, fuck. One does not meet the other. They're creating a set of conditions to talk about the current problems that we have as a society based on this. This is functionally what the media and culture is for. According to the Frankfurt School, and in particular according to Stu Hall, who wasn't a member of the Frankfurt School, he's a British, well, West Indian academic who moved here in the 1960s and was in Birmingham University for many years. This is what discourse does. Discourse legitimizes ideology. For the Frankfurt School, discourse is embedded in the media that we consume. Discourse is a group of statements. Those statements don't have to be statements like I'm making at the moment. They can be visual statements. They can be music. They can be films. They can be television programs. They can be a set of tweets. They can be visual content on Instagram. A statement is something which carries a message of some kind. A way of organising knowledge and understanding so that certain ideas always appear true, and therefore a discourse constructs a certain set of beliefs that are held in common by a number of people in society. The purpose of discourse is to get enough people to agree with your view in order for it to be so. Now, normally I would ask, why? Why is this view of immigrants being made in the UK? This is a contentious topic, and usually I don't back away from contentious, but I do not want anyone to press buttons in me that I will come to regret. So I'm just going to ask you to think about it and keep it to yourself. There are reasons why immigration is talked about in this way. Think about why. You don't have to express that to me, because that could end badly for all of us. When something becomes hegemonic, this is taken as being taken for granted. The truth. Peoples make sense of the world through these truths. There are a certain set of hegemonic ideas which people simply make sense of the world out of, which is why discourses of that kind on immigration are so problematic. Because if you think that immigrants are responsible for all the problems in society, then you have a very problematic view of the world in terms of what migration means and what people of other colours, other religions, other forms of language, other cultural backgrounds, what they actually mean. But we all operate through discourses. Every one of us. We do have choice in what we do. Power is expressed in ideology, and ideology is legitimised through discourse itself. So the link here is that those ideologies are linked closely to power in society. This is an idea which comes from Michel Foucault. They are two related things, but they're also distinct. Ideology is linked to a specific set of power relations. Discourse is actually more diffuse than that. The relationship between discourse and ideology does come from Foucault, who says that power and knowledge are intimately linked and both are used in societal control. Power always controls and defines knowledge. What Foucault's contribution to this discussion is that if we want to understand the discourses that are circulating in the society at a particular time, you look to the ideologies that those discourses legitimise, and then you look to who is in power. And if the ideological position being expressed is in the context of who is in power, does it agree with their views, therefore you have your answer as to why these things are happening. I'm going to skip over that example because we haven't got time. But to close these three lectures off, power is a function of the ownership of means of production. That's something I've been banging on about for weeks, 4 weeks in fact, we've got to study it. Ideology is the ideas of a particular class, and discourse is how those ideas are spread and legitimised. Discourse, culture. All culture is discursive. And this, my friends, is the world that we live in, and how our reality is constructed. I would say next week we're going to do something different, but we're not. I'm not going to be here next week. I will send an email to everyone with arrangements for next week. Fingers crossed, I can cancel that email, the strike gets cancelled. Let's work on the contingency that it is going to happen. I will give instructions.
clarify, I'm not like my nan. I'm not someone that would ever spend £200 on a toast.
Bit burst.
All my whole outfit today is second hand.